Hello, my name is Jonathan Humphreys. I'm head of the International Hotel Development, Asset Management and Finance specializations at the Glion Institute of Higher Education. Welcome to Leading Hospitality Through Turbulent Times. This session is on how to become a future leader. This session will be a discussion of approximately 45 minutes, including questions and answers. We're taking questions in writing only, and you can submit these as we go along in the chat forum. And just a reminder that the session is being recorded and will be available on the Moodle platform afterwards. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our special guest today. Chris Mumford is founder of Cervus Leadership Consulting, a firm focused on executive level recruitment, leadership, and the future of hospitality organizations. He has a wealth of experience of recruiting senior executives over the years with companies such as Ethos, which he co-founded, and HVS Executive Recruitment, where he was the president for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. He has a passion for travel and global connectivity. He is a regular conference speaker and has appeared in Forbes magazine, amongst other publications, for his visionary approach for leaders of the future. It is my absolute pleasure to hand you over to Mr. Christopher Mumford.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the invitation to speak today and to speak with everyone, and looking forward to the interaction and discussion we have today. As Jonathan says, I have over 20 years now of track record and experience in recruiting for the great companies that make up our industry of hospitality. And that's been from analyst and sales manager all the way to chief executive for brands such as Mandarin Oriental, Aman, MGM, Hilton, Marriott, Choice, as well as on the investment side of the business for Qatari Investment Authority, sovereign wealth funds, family offices, and so forth. I'll talk a little bit later during my next few slides in terms of some of the specific work that's taken me to today's talk, but I want to get into the issue of leadership, and what does leadership in our industry look like. So let me just share my screen with everyone. So leadership in hospitality, let's get into who are these guys that run the companies that we all admire and want to work for and enjoy, that make up our industry. Well, a few months ago, actually, before this lockdown and pre kind of coronavirus, I was walking my two sons in London to school, which is probably one of my favorite times of day. Actually, we get to have a good old chinwag and a conversation every morning, normally about football. But on this occasion, my 10-year-old suddenly out of nowhere, as we're walking up the hill towards St. Paul's Cathedral, came out with, "Daddy, I don't want to be a boss." He said, "You have to give money to people, and then you got to give more money to other people, and they just complain and they don't do what you want, and it's just, you just get frustrated." Now, as I say, I have no idea where this came from or what he'd been thinking about, but I was reflecting on it later on, and I realized actually he was giving me quite a nice distinction between management and leadership, and what he was describing was really being a manager as opposed to being a leader. A manager is someone, as Theodore Roosevelt said, leads. A manager just drives them, pardon me. You manage things, but you lead people. Managers are people who expect and force control over their environment, over the people around them. They're freakish about efficiency. They love SOPs. They're very rules driven, very black and white. Clearly, if you're my son, you think you could do that and pay them as little as possible as well at the same time. But what about leadership? So let's get into looking at the psyche of leadership. And again, this is based not only on my 20 years of recruiting these guys and being around and interviewing leaders of our businesses, but also when we were at HVS, we produced a movie called The Power of Advice, which literally took us around the world interviewing CEOs of hospitality organizations on the topic specifically of advice and leadership. And in addition, we had a psychometric platform, a psychometric assessment platform called 2020 Skills. And we had put all of these leaders through these psychometric assessments and got into the science of what makes these guys tick. And it really boils down to three kind of key areas, which we'll explore a little. One is execution. How do they get things done? How do they conduct themselves? Relationships. How do they engage people? How do they relate to others to get those things done? And thinking. How do they think about the world? How do they think about their business? What's their creativity? How do they approach that part of their life? The interesting thing is, these guys aren't topping class in any one of those particular areas, but rather they are consistently, if you look at psychometric results, they consistently score above average in each of those areas. So they're not standout top of class in any one area, but they have quite a broad base at a high level of competency across all those areas. So let's just go into each of those a little bit more. Execution, these are guys, these CEOs, these leaders of our businesses, they're highly opinionated people. If you've dealt with some of them or seen them in media, you'll be able to vouch for that. They have a high respect for process. They're strongly independently minded. They're very self-critical, and they have a strong sense of accountability. They don't kind of shrug things off to other people, but they own their responsibility. They have a high level of self-awareness. And people these days, we talk about things like spiritual intelligence, which is a belief in something very concrete and in depth, maybe outside of your work environment. It could be religious, could be belief in family, but there's something else there that is their bedrock, and that provides them with a very high degree of resilience, which, looking at the times we're in right now, really steads those leaders in particular good shape for getting through times like this. We also talk about physical intelligence, and there's more and more attention these days paid to the physical well-being and how that can resonate with someone's leadership capability. Looking after your body, being in tune with what is happening in your body helps tremendously actually with decision making. And we talk about gut instinct, for a reason. It's what is that feeling inside you? You sense whether that decision is right or wrong. And leaders of these days are becoming more and more in tune with, they're keeping themselves in good shape and being able to tune in to that kind of guiding fork, if you like, of what their body is telling them when they're making decisions, and helping with that intuition. They bring a singular, very high laser focus to issues. They make a decision, but then they're gone. They move on. These guys, they don't hang around thinking, oh, what if we'd done this or that? Was that really the right thing to do? They make a decision and then they're off to the next thing. They love ambiguity, which again, we'll talk maybe more about this, Jonathan, in a while, but in terms of the current environment. But the gray zone, these successful leaders that we looked at over the last, as I say, 20 years, they hate black and white. Don't box them in. They feel restrained and confined in that environment. They love ambiguity because it gives them freedom and creativity and option. And they bring a sense of urgency. You see the Bill Marriott quote there. Successful people keep moving. They make mistakes, but they get back on the horse and they keep going. They're very optimistic by nature. In terms of relationships and people, leaders like to be around people. I mean, it sounds trite, but they like to collaborate, they like to motivate, they like to mobilize resources and people around them, and especially in our sector of hospitality, I would say even more so than in perhaps other industries. People tend to get into hospitality, because they have a sense of adventure. They're open-minded. They want to explore new things. They want to meet new people. And that very much translates down to, the leaders. They're always surrounded by other people. You very rarely find a leader, sequestered by himself and isolating himself. And they communicate an awful lot. Obviously, communication is key. And again, particularly in an environment like this, communication is paramount. And they use humor to do this. It's about, it's about kind of bringing it down to a human level of humility and using humor to diffuse tension and to make people around you comfortable. If you've seen the Arne Sorensen video that he put out right when this crisis hit, and he began his address to the tens of thousands of employees at Marriott, he began by openly making kind of a joke about the fact that he was a bald head because of his chemotherapy, but it instantly set the tone for the rest of that communication and just diffused, put everybody just at ease, gave that little pause to everybody. So, these guys, it's fun for them. I mean, for leaders, give them a nice, difficult challenge. This is a game. Work is play. They're sensitive to those around them, but they're about, creating a positive atmosphere and environment. The other one, obviously, being there with the quote. If you've seen the Sebastian Bazin videos, again, that he's put out, I think it's 3 or 4 by now, but he finished the last one by saying, I love you. And that's, very rarely have we heard an industry leader say that directly to his employees, but it came across with tremendous genuineness and authenticity, and again, has a very positive resonance within the employee workforce at Accor. In terms of thinking, these guys obviously use facts and data. They base decision making on hard data. They don't get stuck in the weeds, so they don't get stuck in the minutiae and the detail, but they absolutely will draw conclusions based on hard, concrete facts. But they're very creative people typically, and they like to have big dreams. If you don't know the story of Conrad Hilton, it's probably worth looking up. But he started he went to Texas one day to buy a bank. Couldn't get a meeting, had to stay in a hotel overnight, saw how busy the hotel was, and they were turning, I think, the rooms 3 times in 24-hour periods. So not sure what they're being used for, but he ended up buying the hotel and then subsequently built up a portfolio. And then the big dream was, I'm going to go to Chicago and New York, which were the 2 powerhouse cities, obviously, at that time in the US. And then the further big dream beyond that was, I'm going to go overseas. And he was the pioneer of taking an American hotel group internationally. So to accomplish big things, you first got to dream those big dreams. And these leaders are never satisfied. They're not interested in the status quo. They're always looking what's next. They're restless, they're forward-looking, they're progressive. Some of the other takeaways of things that have popped up, and of observations I've had and my colleagues over the years have had in terms of leaders. They're always, as I say, they're always attracted to a challenge. Not that they would have wished what is happening now to our industry, but for a lot of leaders, this is pushing every button they have. I mean, this is fantastic. They're relishing the challenge, the friction, the tension, and the opportunity to overcome the challenge in front of them. And even before this, if you look back on our sector, particularly hotel sector, over the last few years, you look at companies like Marriott and Accor again, it's not all down to the one man, the CEO, but those have been very acquisitive, very innovative companies, and they've always been looking for that next thing, that next challenge, and have acted on it. They all have, interestingly, serious hobbies. All the people I've ever spoken to have one particular very strong passion outside of work, which they devote a lot of time and energy to and make sure they carve out the space for. And it's important to have that, to them, it's important to have that outlet. Leadership styles obviously vary, but this, it has to be genuine at the end of the day. We sometimes think in business that leaders have to have this executive presence that people talk about, and they have to be larger than life characters. Actually, charisma, when it's superficial, can be a very damaging thing. It has to be authentic. Leaders have to bring authenticity to their leadership style. Otherwise, they'll be exposed and they just won't get very far. And it's servant leadership. I'm sure a lot of you have studied this already, but our business in particular, hospitality, we're in it because we like to serve others. And the servant leadership style, which is very much come to the fore of leadership thought over the last couple of decades, is very much about you serve those people around you. You're not king at the top of the pyramid, but you're there to support and to create an environment that supports and encourages and develops everyone else around you. And as I mentioned earlier, they're willing to take the heat. Failure is, something they welcome, actually, because they know it makes them stronger. They own up to their mistakes. They have a strong self-confidence in their ability. And they have, interestingly, because it speaks a little bit to vulnerability, they have a very strong sense every morning when they get out of bed that they've got to earn their position. They've got to show that they are worthy of holding the responsibility and position that they have. And that is a very strong motivating factor for the leaders certainly I've experienced. They're not there. Yeah, I'm the king. I've earned all this, but they feel a very strong need every day to prove themselves worthy. And I'd just like to mention also curiosity. And again, if you listen to some of the leaders of our business, this frequently comes up. They are curious individuals, and they encourage people around them to be highly curious and to constantly keep evolving and self-improving. And they have quite a focus on their individual self-development. Just because you're CEO of a company doesn't mean you've reached the pinnacle and that's it, you're done. You're always having to learn and improve. So this desire to lead has been shown to be formed at quite a young age. It's actually quite innate, but the perfecting of it is, that's a process. It probably never completes. It's an ongoing process. And I'd like to finish, Jonathan, before we start talking in our conversation, just with some kind of tips that these guys have shared with us over the years in terms of how they go about their life and which they think makes them more successful in their roles. One is the planning and preparation. So these are very organized people. They keep a clean inbox. They have a notepad of things they got to do. They'll spend the night before planning for the day ahead. They'll spend the weekend thinking about the week ahead. So they're really on top of their game, and then they can build the flex into that as things arise. But they're constantly thinking about what they've got to be doing. The importance of setting aside space and time is often referenced, and being able to take a pause, again, whether that's through a hobby, whether that's through going on a weekend retreat, whether it's just going out for dinner with some colleagues, but setting aside that space and time for reflection. It encourages creativity. It's very important. The maintaining of a business plan. I would say every leader has a business plan in their back pocket somewhere, not only for the next 5 years, but probably for the next 1 and 3 and then 5 years. The caveat to that being there's a high degree of, that's ready to be thrown out and a new plan implemented when something goes wrong, or, it's not a fixed plan. It's a plan. It's a kind of roadmap, if you like, but they're not afraid to take a detour or to deviate if needed. Speaking about the curiosity, they read voraciously, and that's something that is always encouraged. Explore, find out, learn, things from outside the sector. Never stop looking for talent. Once you're in a leadership role, and forming people around you, and mentoring and leading those people, always be on the lookout for, someone good to join your organization. Doesn't mean you have to have a job for them right now, but that's something these guys are always doing. They're always meeting people who could potentially, have a fit within their team. The importance of network. Network. It's our business, particularly I think in hospitality, which is so global. It's still a small village at the end of the day. There's tremendous number of people, I know working in Asia who were previously in the Middle East and previously in Europe, and I may have spent some time when I was in New York 20 years ago with them. It's that network and those relationships is key. And hospitality people, as you know, are pretty social anyway, so it's quite easy to do. But if I look at the work I do of recruiting senior executives into organizations, companies like mine account for a very small percentage of the number of jobs that actually get filled. Most of these roles are filled by friends of friends, word of mouth, referrals. So the importance of having that network, and it's also a source of knowledge, education, finding out other things. Who can I call to know about, we're going to open a new hotel in Prague. Who do I know in the Czech Republic who I can talk to for advice? And that brings me on to the board of advisors, creating your own personal board. This is something, again, which most of these leaders over time have surrounded themselves with, 3, 4, 5, maybe people from various walks of life, probably most often actually from outside of the hospitality sector, but people that they can go to when they need help, when they feel that they need someone to bounce an idea off. Stephen Alden, who you see there in the middle right, has, I think, one of his personal board advisors. One is a horse trainer, one's an architect, one is an uncle. These are people that, when he's got something he's trying to chew through and come get to grips with, he'll call upon for advice. And, no man is an island. It can get a little lonely in a leadership role. You don't want you think you have to know it all, but the wise leader knows that he doesn't know it all, and it's okay to ask for help and to have those people that he can trust to give them good advice. So those are some of the tips. And Jonathan, maybe now we can move into the questions and exploring some of these issues further.
Wonderful, Chris. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for that great summary. I'd just like to highlight to the audience that obviously that's a synthesis of many years of recruitment and identifying what makes for a successful leader and what doesn't make for a successful leader. Just because you're in a leadership position doesn't necessarily mean you're successful. And as you highlighted, it's based on a huge amount of research as well. So trying to synthesize all this into literally a 10-minute, 15-minute presentation is obviously, I think, beneficial, but it obviously doesn't give the full depth to what is really going on there. One of the things I'm going to come back to is just for you to think about, Chris, and we'll come back to it a bit later. You focused on what makes for a successful leader. I think it would be helpful for the audience, kind of what are the key no-nos that you've seen and what makes for an unsuccessful leader? And maybe without giving names, you can maybe draw on some of the experiences of what's happened during this current crisis. But that's a question to park for the moment. I think that would be a good question to answer. But what I would like to do is, first of all, focus on the gray zone. And you've highlighted this. You talked about complexity, ambiguity, all of these things. And you said that good leaders are very comfortable in that zone and being able to deal with that. I have a question around that. So, and I want to kind of bring it back a little bit. You've written articles on VUCA, which is around volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And you wrote these articles about leadership being prepared for this. Before the crisis, we're talking years ago, and the students have an article that they can view later, which is on VUCA. But I'm just wondering, is there a way to tie these things together in terms of how can people prepare to get comfortable with the gray zone? How can they start to get comfortable with coping with complexity and ambiguity at an earlier age? So that when something like a crisis hits, it's not like they're completely thrown sideways and unable to deal with the situation, because I'm sure it's about building up some kind of resilience as well. So I'm just thinking about our audience here. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about the VUCA, the gray zone, the complexity, the ambiguity, but then the question to that is how can the younger generation or anybody prepare for that resilience and tolerance building?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely we're seeing in moments of crisis like this the importance of that, because no 2 days are the same. And as a leader of an organization or even a team, a small could just be a couple of people, there's so much uncertainty and unknown. And the successful leaders are those that are able to swim with the tide, if you like, and to go with that and to react and to bring a heightened agility to their responsiveness. I mean, as you mentioned, VUCA is something that's been around for about 40, 50 years as a concept of how do you deal with times of volatility, uncertainty, and complexity, and so forth. I think in terms of how do you prepare for it, it's you want to seek it out, and you want to try to expose yourself to times of adversity without sounding too kind of negative and rough. But are there leadership opportunities outside of your immediate environment? Could you go work for, go mountaineering, take a group of people up a mountain, or work for the fire brigade, or something in some area which is going to expose you to, by its nature, it's going to expose you to some degree of uncomfortableness, getting out your comfort zone, uncertainty, having to react and respond and keep a group of people together in a difficult situation. And I do think this adversity quotient, which people refer to a little bit more and more now, building up this ability to cope with adversity is going to be sought after more and more by organizations in the future, and they're going to start to assess for this and look when they're hiring, how does someone cope with adversity? And so I think, it doesn't have to be in your current school or professional environment. You can be, through an outside interest, but to try to seek that out and to actively put yourself in a situation that is not comfortable, and bit by bit you start to build up your resilience and your coping mechanisms.
Okay, wonderful, Chris. I think that's a nice approach and a good recommendation for the students, that actually they can also do it as part of their kind of spectrum of life. It doesn't necessarily need to be within the current environment that they're in, or even necessarily the job. But I think that's also for personal development. It's kind of broadening as much as you can and getting exposure to different elements. The next question, and I think it's really around, you've used the word guys a lot during this presentation, and I think it's a mid-Atlantic approach to guys being general for guys and gals. So I just want to highlight that for the audience. However, even showing the pictures that you've obviously put together, there is a question mark about diversity in leadership positions within hospitality. I'm not sure it's kind of necessary that the students will bring it up, so I'm going to bring it up. What's happening with regards to diversity, and where are the future leaders from all kinds of backgrounds and approaches? Yeah. So what's your view on that, Chris?
Yeah, the bad news is there aren't anywhere near enough female leaders in our business, or leaders of ethnic diversity. The good news is companies and organizations are actively trying to do something about it. So, and this is probably only in the last 10 years that the conversation has shifted to actually doing something about it. So, and I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, I've been asked over the last 2 or 3 years by a handful of hotel organizations if I could put together a kind of almost like a talent pool of in this case female general manager talent, and companies like Marriott, Radisson, Four Seasons, and they are actively moving to a point where they want to be able to have 2 final candidates for every open position within their organization, and those 2 candidates have to be 1 male, 1 female. And to start moving that way, ultimately over time you'll start to see more and more female talent come through. We've seen at a senior level there's been quite a lot of action board level in terms of getting more female board representation, and across general industry that's now up to about 30%. Hospitality is still lagging at about 15-17%. So there's still an awful long way to go. I think in hospitality there are some struggles that are inherent to the business, such as the social hour, the working hours and social hours are often not compatible, particularly once you start talking about motherhood and so forth. But there are more and more examples of successful female leaders coming through our business. Amy McPherson at Marriott, Deborah Duggar is a GM here in London who was very active in that, brought up 2 kids and became a very high profile GM in London. And so it's happening. It's not happening fast enough probably, and I hope that crises like this don't derail some of these initiatives. It's interesting in the political environment and landscape, if you look at some of the leadership of nations around the world and how they've handled crisis. Actually, there's various articles out there showing that female leaders have done a better job, and it'd be fantastic to see more women coming in. But there are some companies, particularly public companies, are putting quotas in now around we've got to have a certain amount of diversity represented in the organization.
Okay, great, Chris. Thank you. I think obviously with what's happening with the current crisis, this whole remote working, flexible working may actually create more opportunities going forward as well for everybody. Yes. There's a question here. I'm just going to publish it. It's from one of our faculty, Barbara, and she's asking, she first of all says, it's an excellent talk. Could you comment on the role of mentorship? And you mentioned Stephen Alden, who's actually a Glion alum, so it's nice you brought him up. And you mentioned that he's kind of got this kind of group of different coaches, advisors. But could you maybe talk about the role of mentorship? Is having a mentor important? And how can students approach a good mentor, and how to manage such a relationship? What's your view on that? And I guess maybe we need to maybe differentiate between mentorship and coaching. They're two separate things.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's a two-way street. So leaders, first of all, I'll take it from the existing leaders are all very open to mentoring the younger generation and those that are following them. And there's something I didn't actually reference because I'm on the slides. They feel a strong commitment to giving back to the community and to the industry. And so, first of all, if you're seeking mentorship, you should know that the leaders that you're interested in being mentored by are probably very open and accessible to doing that. I just had a senior vice president of a hotel group last week actually asked me, Chris, I'd love to get more involved with the hotel schools and doing, talks and lectures. And so, they're interested in helping out. So that's one thing. Secondly, who do you go after? I think, you maybe want to change it up a bit and have different mentors during your career and life. Depending on what stage you're at. I would say obviously it should be someone you admire for whatever reason. It could be someone who's not too like you, but maybe there's someone in your sphere, in your world that you hold in high regard, and you see, hey, this guy, that's not how I would do that. That's kind of interesting how this guy, girl, is approaching the issue. That would be good to be able to learn from someone like that. And so therefore to approach, someone of that nature. But mentorship, needs to be structured. It needs to be clear in terms of the expectations and the commitments. Is this, can I call you up anytime, or is it a once a month kind of 1 hour sit down? Is it to help me sort out issues I've got within the company, or is it more about career development and self-development? So it's very clear to get right from the outset what the expectations and deliverables are on both sides of the relationship.
Okay, wonderful, Chris. Thank you. For those of you that are interested, I'm just about to publish a podcast. If you go to my LinkedIn on mentorship, it's an interview about mentorees and mentors. So you can find that there very shortly. Just another question, Chris. And actually, this is a personal one. And I'm gonna rephrase this question a little bit. How would you describe because you've got the benefit of kind of having this interaction and recruiting for all of these leaders, and obviously you've been leading your own organizations, with the HVS executive recruitment, and then Athos, and now this one. How would you describe your role, your type of leadership? How do you kind of lead, and how do you perceive yourself as a leader in terms of the kind of characteristics that you have? What would you say your style of leadership is?
My personal style is very human, by which I mean I take great care I see my role as a leader of my business is to provide a fun environment that people want to go to every day and enjoy being at and working with those around them, provide them the tools to get the job done, provide them with opportunity to develop and grow. So sometimes as an example, maybe I need to speak to this client about this particular assignment we're doing, but X, what you do that yourself this time. You don't need me there. Just as to for example, but to kind of give them some free rein to find out things for themselves. And then I would say the other one is I'm quite questioning as opposed to directive. So if someone comes to me and says, Chris, I don't know how to get from A to B. I'm not going to tell them the straightest road from A to B, but I'm going to say, well, what do you think? How do you think you could get there? What's, why do you think you need to go to C before going to B? But just to get them to question and think about things for themselves. But it's about building. I think it's so important that you build an environment where people want to go to every day and enjoy being at, because it takes up so much time of someone's life that why wouldn't you? And to keep the work interesting, and as I say, to help develop people, and then if they go off to do other things, great. It's not necessarily a big loss. I would see that as I've helped them get there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris. Just coming back to my one of my first questions, just as a guidance, what would you say are the no-nos of leadership? What are the ones where you just say, look, avoid doing this? This is something that's going to put you in deep water. I mean, maybe you can draw on the current crisis, but you've highlighted all the things that a leader should do, and the successful ones have done. The ones that you've seen that have been unsuccessful, is there anything that you can say, look, just try and avoid doing this, or this doesn't work, or these are some of the reasons why these leaders have failed?
Yeah, I would say, number one, don't believe in your own hype. I mean, some of the unsuccessful leaders I've seen, they think they're amazing. They think they're the best. They're God's gift to leadership and hospitality. So there's no place for ego. I'd say that's a no-no right there. You need to be humble, and bring that humility through in your leadership style. So no place for heavy overriding ego. I mean, there's obvious no-nos around, how you treat people, and there's certain legal things you shouldn't be doing. But I would say, and again, this is where leaders think they're being leaders, but they stray into being more managers. Is this they become dictatorial, and you see this perhaps in certain parts of the world more than others. But there's not a place, at least in Europe and the kind of Western culture of very directional, dictatorial leadership, and then do this now, and if it's not done, then you blow up and have a huge temper tantrum. That there's no place for that these days. People will walk. They won't stay with you. They won't follow you. They're not going to hang around and follow someone who's a screamer and a shouter. And it's, if I think back to when I started 20 plus years ago, and some of the GMs I would deal with who were clients at the time, and they were known for being shouters, and they would yell and scream at employees. And again, perhaps there was a place for that one day, I don't know, but now that's a big no-no. That's not how you get the best out of people.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I mean, even some of the celebrity chefs have adjusted their style now in the kitchens, right, to make it more palatable. You talked a lot about emotional intelligence, and we've got a question here about the shared values, or the values of the individual. So, like, combining maybe those, how important is it that the leader today shares their own personal values of what is important to them? You talked a bit about authenticity. I'm assuming there's some kind of connection there, that in order to be authentic, you have to kind of be sharing your own personal values. So I'm just wondering if you can kind of maybe connect, if they are connected, if you can draw these things together, so that we can kind of answer that question there.
Yes, hugely important is my quick answer. People work for people, they don't work for companies. Okay, so as a leader, your team is working for you because they believe in you. It doesn't matter what the name of the company above the door is necessarily, or okay, there's a mission statement and set of values on the wall and the website, but ultimately they're turning up every day because of you as a leader. And so to get that relationship, I think you have to share your value system and your value set. There's just no other way of doing it, to properly engage in an authentic manner. So yes, I think you shouldn't be please do not be afraid to be who you are. And this is, and self-awareness, I think, is tremendously important now. And, knowing the distinction between, am I acting because this is how I think I'm supposed to act, or is this truly who I am? But bringing through who you are, I think ultimately will stand you in a stronger stead, and people will buy. Some people just might not buy into it, fine, but enough, the others will, and they'll follow you.
I think actually you've highlighted the Arne Sorensen video and Sebastian Bazin videos, and actually you can, if you look at other CEO videos or leadership videos, you can actually see the differences in maybe that authenticity coming through or not, right? So it's probably a good opportunity for the students to explore how those videos come across. So there is a question here, it's just following up on the same topic and kind of not to draw it out too much. You've talked about how leaders do what you do and also how you do what you do. So are disciplinary leaders not anymore a way to manage people? I think you've answered it, but I guess the flip side to that is it's more of a motivational way of managing people. So I'm just wondering, is there a role for discipline in leadership? Maybe we can turn it around like that. Is there a time when discipline is needed in leadership or being disciplinary?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. You've got to set the boundaries, and people need to know, what the parameters are of what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, what is, appropriate or not. I think you can do that without being, like the strict school teacher kind of approach. I think people will often understand implicitly, where the line is drawn. And obviously, if the line gets crossed over, then you've got to take action. And whilst it's important to create an encouraging, supportive environment, it's also within that the need is still there to make some very hard decisions. And I mean, I've been through this experience after the global financial crisis of making people redundant, and obviously we have this with the crisis right now. But there are some very tough decisions which, as human beings, aren't comfortable to make, but you have to make it fast, and you have to make, if it's a deep cut, better make it a quick cut and get it done, and it's in the interest of the individual if you're letting them go as much as you. So I think you can set those boundaries without being in someone's face. If someone messes up, fine. And failure should often, again, with my team in the past, I've often encouraged, it didn't work out. Okay, but you tried, you gave it a go. If the intent has been right and this is a genuine effort to try to do the right thing, fine. If, there's a cancer in the team and someone is just deliberately being disruptive and so on, then you've got to take action fast and cut it out.
Okay. All right, great, Chris. I think also there, in terms of defining those boundaries and articulating them, it probably also comes back to values, like the personal values, obviously, and also, the requirements of the organization, the shareholders, investors, whoever they may be, and combining that with the personal values. It probably helps those leaders define what those, how to be directional and how to be more emotional or coaching. So we're close to the end of the session. I'll see if we have any more questions. One of the questions that we have, I think, is a great question. Where do you go for inspiration? What books do you recommend? Do you have like a top 3 that you say, look, if you're going to read anything in the next few months before you're graduating, or your next internship, or your next just as a self-development, so you can take on more leadership positions within the university as well, then what do you have? Some recommendations for the students?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much out there, but you can draw inspiration from so many different aspects of life and people who've done different things. So I would first of all recommend people to watch and read Everything and Anything by Simon Sinek, who's most well known for his book Start With Why, and that is a tremendous starting point, I think. And he's got there's a lot of content online that Simon Sinek has put out. The other 2 I would recommend, which are handily on my bookshelf behind me, Good to Great by Jim Collins, is the kind of definitive book on how a company goes from being good to being great. And there's very few companies that have done it. But within that, there's some very interesting lessons on leadership. And then the other one, talking about other areas of life, I like my rugby, but Legacy by Jim Kerr, which came out just a few years ago, is a tremendous book on what makes the All Blacks New Zealand rugby team the most dominant, successful rugby team in the world, and the culture of that team and the leadership principles that they've engaged. So it takes the secret sauce of the All Blacks and gives it a business spin. But I've given that book out to countless people. I think it's tremendous.
Wonderful. Chris, we've come to the end of our time. We could carry on for a lot longer. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on this session and for you sharing your insights and your, I guess, all of your collective wisdom of these leaders that you've appointed over the years into successful positions. I just want to say a big thanks to the audience as well for participating in this discussion. If you would like follow up, there will be links provided to Chris's articles that he's written over the recent time, so that you can also learn more about Chris and his leadership recommendations. So a big thanks to everybody, and especially a big thanks to Chris Mumford. Thank you.